Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to our friends and colleagues in Europe. It is now 11 a.m. in Washington, D.C. It is now 4 p.m. in Bakhmut, and we're very delighted that all of you can be joining us today for this discussion. It is very exciting for us. I'm Glenn Howard, the president of Jamestown Foundation. You're participating in a live webinar today entitled Prigozhin, the Kremlin, and the Battle for Bakhmut. We got excellent timing for our event today because it's my understanding that President Zelensky of Ukraine just visited Bakhmut today. So we're certainly delighted he's giving a boost to our discussion on this very important topic. As many of you know, for the past 7 months, Russia has been waging the battle for Bakhmut, a city that has relatively little strategic importance, but it's been involved in the losses of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. It's certainly in eastern Bakhmut has fallen under Kremlin control in the last week, and Ukraine is still in possession of the western part of the city. Russia and Ukraine are experiencing shortages of ammunition, and inside Russia, a new mobilization effort has undertaken as their manpower levels stand at a critical crossroads as Western armor, tanks, and munitions are flowing into Ukraine to help Ukraine with a long-anticipated spring offensive against the Russian forces inside Donbass and in parts of Ukraine. The battle for Bakhmut will have a lasting impact on Russia and Russian society, and we're very delighted that we could be bringing these three speakers to you today. Rather than focus on the Ukrainian side of the war, we wanted to talk about Russian perspectives of the war. And there's no finer distinguished experts to have discussed this today than Pavel Bayev, Pavel Luzin, and Sergei Sukhankin. I'll be moderating the discussion. Many of you know Pavel Bayev. He writes regularly for the Eurasia Daily Monitor. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center in the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution. He's also a research professor at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. He's a longtime expert on Russian military reform and the Russian military. Pavel will be giving a presentation today about the strategic perspectives of Putin in the war, where it's going, where it's maybe running into problems, and sharing his perspectives at the strategic level. Our next speaker following him will be Dr. Pavel Luzin, who's a visiting scholar at the Fletcher School of Diplomacy, Tufts University. He's a regular contributor to the Jamestown Foundation, Eurasia Daily Monitor. He's a specialist in international relations and expert on Russian armed forces. And both Pavel and Pavel have written very excellent articles in Monday's issue of Eurasia Daily Monitor. I highly encourage everyone to look at it. Our last speaker will be Dr. Sergei Sukhankin, who's a senior fellow also at the Jamestown Foundation. He's an advisor at Gulf State Analytics. He received a PhD in contemporary political and social history from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He writes regularly on the Russian military, environmental security issues, the Baltic, writes about many different things. He's currently involved in a project called Guardians of the Belt and Road, Chinese PSC securities companies. And so many of you know Sergei's writings on war by other means about Wagner. So many consider him to be one of the leading experts on Wagner in the world today. But all these experts are very great experts on many aspects of Russia. And so I will turn the floor over to Pavel Bayev, based in Oslo, Norway. And Pavel, so tell us where we're going with the war and what do you see happening in Bakhmut going forward?
Yes, thank you very much, Glenn. I'm very glad to be a part of this discussion. And the question which is asked so often is, why Bakhmut? What is so special about Bakhmut? And the shortest answer is this small place in Ukraine has, in fact, become a center of gravity of the war in the very Clausewitzian sense of the term. It's already a long war, and the center of gravity has shifted several times. It was initially on Kiev, and then it shifted to Kharkov, and then it shifted to Kherson, and now it is in the rather improbable Bakhmut. And you look at the map, why there? It's very difficult to kind of rationalize this phenomenon in purely strategic terms. The map will give you no good answer to that. And it's not by some clever strategic design it has become the center of gravity. In fact, it comes from the kind of clash of two very different positions on this war from Russian and Ukrainian. And I will not go into depths about Ukrainian side. There are better experts on that. But I think what is very special about Ukrainian position is that they're fighting a total war. which is a very different kind of war from most other wars, comparable perhaps with in United States military history only with a civil war. This total war requires incredible mobilization. It involves painful sacrifices, and it's a very special politics of this total war, in which suddenly a small point becomes of huge importance. And the importance is that the whole nation sees there we take the stand. They will not pass. No pasaran. This is it. And again, you try to kind of rationalize it and tactically and operationally, it is very hard. But that is the importance of Bakhmut for Ukraine. And that's why Zelensky is there again after his visit in December. He understands this politics better than anybody else. And I think we need to trust his instinct on this, trust his judgment. On the Russian side, it's certainly a very different perspective. It's not a total war at all. It's still a special military operation, even if Putin is trying to argue at the same time that it's at stake is the existence of the Russian state. But it's in fact a kind of contradiction in terms. It's either a special military operation or it's a question of Russia's existence. It cannot be both. But this war is full of these paradoxes. And the importance of Bakhmut from the kind of Russian perspective is determined by two very different factors. And one, they can have two different names, so to say. One name is Putin, and another name is Prigozhin. And for Putin, the importance of Bakhmut is that it symbolizes the fact that Russia has the initiative, that Russia controls the course of the war. Yes, there were setbacks in Kiev, in Kherson, but that these pages are turned. Russia is now in control of the course of the war. It is on the offensive. It's moving forward. Yes, hard and painful and so on. And for Putin, I think that importance of that particular place of Bakhmut is that it was persistently denied by Ukrainian. The victory was denied for the new year when he made the kind of the address to the nation. It was denied for his address to the Federal Assembly. It is denied for the visit of Xi Jinping to Moscow, denied again and again and again. It becomes a matter of principle. He needs to prove that his special operation indeed goes to plan, and that is the place to prove it. Nothing else is of similar importance. The war, in fact, on the Russian side is falling into several different episodes, and what's happened in Solidar and Ugledar is different from what happens around Avdiivka, with kind of different operational designs, and still more or less under kind of overall plan controlled by Gerasimov and the General Staff. And Putin and Gerasimov has just had a long conversation in Rostov-on-Don, if Russian media is to be believed. Gerasimov is really kind of gearing for the long war, assuming that attrition works for Russia. It is also a political perspective, not necessarily military. It could be questioned on several levels. Gerasimov is not in charge of the economic situation, and I think Putin is not in complete control of these matters either. Nevertheless, in that long war perspective, keeping initiative is crucial. Denying Ukraine control over the course of the war is kind of a central proposition. What kind of adds to that kind of centrality is the second driver of the importance of Bakhmut, whose name is Prigozhin. Maybe it's not just Prigozhin, it's Prigozhin and Wagner. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, political sides of the same military side. And on the military side, I think what we can learn from the course of the war, that initially there were all sort of formations and units and militias fighting on the Russian side. There was very little of unity of command, on each direction, the commander will act with very little cooperation with other directions. We saw Chechens and Cossacks and volunteer battalions from the regions and military formations from Donetsk and Luhansk Republic and whatnot. Very motley picture. So the failure of Russia on the initial sides of the war was very much determined by that lack of unity of command. It changed with the announcement of mobilization gradually, and Chechens has retreated to Chechnya. The Luhansk and Donetsk units were incorporated into the military. Volunteer battalions have more or less disappeared. Generally, unity of command is restored, with the exception of Wagner. That phenomenon, I think, is really quite unexpected for the Russian top brass, and they expect to put an end to that phenomenon at Bakhmut, hoping to bury that Wagner units and their special role there. Bakhmut is important for the Russian top brass because it would signify the end of the Wagner and its special profile. Prigozhin, however, has a very different perspective. He refuses to be sacrificed. He refuses to play a scapegoat in any way. He's very much a tougher operative than many generals, with his biography, with his prison terms, with his life record in organized crime, not very much in military operations, but he definitely sees it very differently, and he aims at saving not just his bacon, but much more than that. Insists on combining his own particular sources of recruitment with his own particular sources of fundraising. He's not an oligarch in a full sense. Probably Sergei will speak more about him, but definitely for Prigozhin, again, this is the place where which for him is do or die, where he needs to prove that he can do things which Gerasimov cannot. He can be much more successful, he can be much more flexible, he can achieve something where Russian general staff is going to help us hopeless. He can prove that it's not just about the long war, but also about achieving success and scoring points. And I don't think he will succeed. It's not up to him to score at this point. It's very much up to Ukrainians. But nevertheless, the centrality of Bakhmut in this war now is there. And I think it is going to continue until that moment when Ukrainian forces will start their counteroffensive, because probably it will not be around Bakhmut. It will be somewhere else, where they would find vulnerability and fluidity enough in the battle lines, where their newly formed brigades, newly armed, newly equipped, newly trained, can gain some operational space, can really hit hard into Russian positions. And I think for them, Bakhmut creates a very useful opportunity, because being Russian positions completely fortified and rigidified and going into defensive mode, it will be much harder. With the kind of Russian offensive push continuing, and its general staff feels obliged to keep this push going, not least because Prigozhin keeps doing it. They cannot afford him all the laurels, all the ability to keep on offensive. So I think all in all, for Ukrainians, it is very beneficial that Russians continue this attempt at offensive operation, despite all the casualties, despite all the waste. And I hope that Bakhmut will be the key to Ukrainian success in late spring, early summer. And I'll stop here. That's my 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. That's a great overview of the situation. And now we're going to turn to Sergei Sukhankin, to share your perspectives about Wagner and Prigozhin. And so kind of take us away there, Sergey.
Okay, thank you very much, Glenn. It's my great pleasure to be able to speak and share my ideas on this event. So I divided my presentation, not my presentation, but rather my talk, onto two parts. So initially, I will talk about the military component related to Wagner's involvement in the war in Ukraine, and more specifically, of course, in its actions on the Donbass around Bakhmut. And in the second part, I will talk about political component and the role that Prigozhin is playing or is expected to play in the future. So as for the military component, first, one important thing that I noticed in operations, in activities of the Wagner Group in Ukraine is this dramatic evolution of its role, its its tasks starting from the beginning of the war. So initially, as we noticed, as we saw, the Wagner Group, it was present in Ukraine from the very beginning of the war. But initially, they were primarily performing tasks associated with reconnaissance and some subversive activities. But later on, the Battle of Donbass became, in a way, at least initially, became an hour of triumph for the Wagner Group. In fact, in such battles as Battle of Severodonetsk, the Battle of Lysychansk, Solidar, Popasna, Wagner Group played a very important, I would say, the key role in operational successes of the Russian side. I will talk about Bakhmut a little bit earlier, but now I'll just provide you with some very brief takeaways from this point. So I was a bit surprised, even though I wrote about this in 2018, 2019, that the Wagner Group is being used in Ukraine in many ways instead of Russian armed forces. Because prior in Syria, in Donbass, in Libya, probably Wagner Group was used also in many ways. It performed those functions that are typically assigned to armed forces, but that was done on a much more limited scale. Now in Donbass, the Wagner Group is playing the role on many occasions, at least it has played the role of vanguard of advancing Russian forces. Also, another kind of surprise, at least to me, is that today Wagner Group looks like one of the most, if not the most, combat-ready portion of the Russian armed forces. And also, it is quite interesting that Prigozhin is always arguing that the core of Wagner Group are prisoners or convicts. In fact, in my opinion, although we don't have solid data for that, I'm kind of making my guess based on different sources. In fact, I don't think that the core is actually the Wagner Group, not the Wagner Group, sorry, the prisoners or convicts. I think these are also members, retired members of Russian Special Forces, or maybe those prisoners who did have a vast experience of fighting or military service. Now, getting back to Bakhmut and the role of Wagner, I think that, and I will kind of side with what Pavel said. I think that for Wagner Group, the Battle of Bakhmut may become sort of a tipping point in this whole affair of Bakhmut and its participation in the war in Donbass. Prigozhin now is very well aware of the fact that or how rather important his PMC is for the Russian armed forces and for Russian offensive in the Donbass. And now he's doing his best, he's doing his utmost to be able to capitalize on this quality of Wagner Group. He's constantly referring to Wagner Group. He's specifically highlighting this private aspects. He's saying that all the successes achieved, and he's dismissing all successes achieved by the Russian side. He's only saying that it is the Wagner Group, which is purely private army, private military company, which is the best in the world. So he's basically dismissing even the participation of Russia's regular armed forces, making specific emphasis on the role of the Wagner Group, which it has played in the war. What is also important is that Prigozhin, Bakhmut it plays a very important, very strategic role. Just less than, I think, 1 week ago, he gave an extensive interview where he talked about the image or the way how he sees his private military company following the seizure of Bakhmut. Well, in his interview, he was quite positive that Wagner Group will be able to seize Bakhmut. He said that Wagner Group will increase the number of personnel. He said that based on current current rate by May, the number of Wagner Group should increase by another 30,000 new conscripts. And to me, what is really important here is that he started talking about Wagner Group not just as a PMC, but rather as an army. And as he specifically highlighted this point, he said that Wagner will become an army with an ideology, which to me is one of the manifestations, one of the signs that Prigozhin is likely, or rather might, use Wagner Group as a tool for a struggle for power in Russia, because I think that he sees that the central power, the central authority is not as strong as it used to be, and Prigozhin might be willing or might be preparing for some kind of battle or struggle for power in the future. At the same time, I think that, and I'm getting to the last part of this military component here, at the same time, Wagner Group has been badly damaged. We don't know unfortunately, we don't have any reliable data, any reliable information. We will have a multiplicity of Western reports coming from different sources that say that between 3,000 to 15,000 Wagner fighters have been killed in Ukraine, in around Bakhmut. The Ukrainian sources provide even more optimistic numbers. Prigozhin himself has said a couple of times that he's losing. He said that casualties are about hundreds, as he said, hundreds of his guys, mercenaries per day. Again, it's very, very hard to verify those numbers. But Prigozhin, I think, is becoming increasingly concerned about prospective or the upcoming spring or summer offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces. Just 2 days ago, I think 2 or 3 days ago, he wrote an open letter to Shoigu where he stated, and I'm quoting him, Shoigu does everything possible not to allow to surrender the Wagner Group in Bakhmut, which I think is quite interesting, could be quite interesting. We'll see where this goes. And now in the second part.
Why do you say it's interesting? Excuse me for interrupting. Why do you say that letter is interesting beyond the obvious?
Yeah, that letter is interesting because I'm not really sure what Prigozhin wants to achieve through this letter. Whether if things go badly for him, he might be willing to argue that it happened, everything stemmed as a result of inaction on behalf of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Shoigu personally, Gerasimov, or the General Staff. At the same time, again, if this is something genuine, which I don't expect, honestly, from Prigozhin, given his background and his personality, maybe his offensive potential is indeed damaged, and he's really concerned about Wagner Group being destroyed or surrounded around Bakhmut, if in case, and I know that the Ukrainian General Staff is thinking about, as one of the options, they're actually considering to conduct a counteroffensive or to start counteroffensive around Bakhmut, which would make sense from military point of view, by the way. So this may be another reason. So hope this answers your question, then.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yes.
No, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. And in the second part, here I'm talking about even perhaps more speculative aspect, which is a political component associated, related to Wagner Group and Prigozhin personally. So now in Western media and in Russian and some Russian sources, we see increasing amount of information about Prigozhin's conflict with Shoigu / Gerasimov, with Ministry of Defense, with the General Staff, But in fact, this is nothing new. I was monitoring developments in Libya and Syria. And in fact, in 2019, there was already a conflict between the Russian armed forces or representatives of the Ministry of Defense and Prigozhin. And seemingly the conflict was extinct, so it was kind of hushed down during the visit of Khalifa Haftar to the Russian Federation, which I believe it was in 2019. So during the Wagner's involvement in the Libyan civil war. So at that time, and also there were reports that during the decimation of the Wagner group in Syria in early 2018 near Deir el-Zor, where reportedly up to 200 Russian mercenaries were killed. In fact, that happened as a result of conflict between Russia's Ministry of Defense and Prigozhin. Again, we don't have any corroborations on this, but there are multiple reports on the issue. So if there is indeed a conflict between Shoigu / Gerasimov and Prigozhin, then this is by no means a new development. So we've seen this before. The current conflict is reportedly developing around the ammunition hunger that the Wagner group is reportedly experiencing in Bakhmut. But other sources, Russian sources, are saying, of course, anonymous soldiers are actually complaining that the Wagner group is receiving everything they ask for, everything they need around Bakhmut, and it is the Russian regular armed forces that are experiencing this ammunition hunger. So how genuine this issue is, I mean, it's a huge debate. I think, in fact, and I'm arguing this point in my next article for EDM, is that, in my opinion, Prigozhin is using this conflict to build, or rather to pursue, maybe his political agendas. He is actually, it's quite interesting, he's building connections with Manturov, he's building connections with Volodin, he's building connections with regional governors of those regions, for those Russian regions that are bordering the territory of Ukraine, which is also quite an interesting development. What it reminds me of is our media wars in the 1990s, where the Russian oligarchs were trying to challenge each other and Kremlin in a way. So this is what Prigozhin is doing. At least it looks like this. And what is also interesting in his last interview was that he drew this dividing line between ministers and Russia's power vertical and his PMC, well, definitely himself. He was always referring, he actually said that ministers in Russia come and go, and the Russian people stay. And then he said that he went on saying that the Wagner group is in fact the Russian people, which is quite interesting. I would say also a very interesting development. So I think that Prigozhin definitely does have political ambitions. He's a very, very experienced individual. He started his way to prominence in the 80s. He survived 1990s. He rose to prominence, financial prominence at least, in the 2000s, and now I think he's sensing that the central authorities, Putin, and those who are close to him are losing perhaps popularity among the Russian society, within the Russian society, and this may be his cue, actually. Well, this is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great overview, Sergey, from all these different perspectives. So, Pavel, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. You're the Russian manpower expert. You've written about it on Monday for EDM. You've been talking a lot about the shortages of Russian manpower and how they're trying to make up for this war. And I think that's the big strategic question, is where Russia will go with its manpower questions in fighting this war. So, Pavel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Glenn, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depends on where you are. So, beyond the Bakhmut battle, and beyond all these mercenaries, Wagner's, with all its prisoners and so on, the Russian military leadership is trying to solve the biggest question of how to restore its manpower. and maybe Wagner Group is just helping the Ministry of Defense to win some time to solve the issue of manpower, because the mobilization that started in September 2022 has been considered not so successful like it has been declared. Even General Gerasimov said this in his interview in January 2023, that the mobilization system in Russia is not very well combined with the economic system and with social system of Russia. So it seems that the Ministry of Defense is trying to find something else instead of direct mobilization, instead of coercion and violence, because they were able to mobilize some people in September and October. These people are the most loyal. They are, they are weak enough in terms of moral, in terms of resistance and so on. And currently, if the Ministry of Defense is going to continue the mobilization, it will face more resistance, because the most loyal people are already mobilized, and where to find more. So here, the three dimensions of Ministry of Defense efforts. The first dimension, the Ministry of Defense declared that it is going to have 521,000 contracted soldiers by the end of 2023. There is no any realistic reasons to achieve this goal. I mean, in 2020, when there were 405,000 contracted soldiers in the Russian armed forces, the plan was to get 500,000 contracted soldiers by 2027. Currently, the number of contracted soldiers is much lower than 405,000 soldiers. What is this number? I don't know. Because of losses, because of retirements, and so on, because of decreasing popularity of contracted military service in Russia, there is a problem. But at the same time, the Ministry of Defense is not going to give up this purpose to get 521,000 contracted soldiers by the end of 2023. The second dimension is increasing the age of conscription. Currently, the young Russian men, the age of 18 to 26, are conscripted. Every year, it was around 260,000 conscripted soldiers. But the last year, the number was lower, because the spring conscription was about 89 soldiers instead of planned 134,000 soldiers, because people were not going to go to the army. And on the fall of 2022, the plan was 120,000 soldiers. And officially, this plan has been achieved, but has been completed. But when I search through the regional data in December 2022, many regions were not able to execute the plan. So I'm not sure whether or not this plan has been completed. So the number of conscripted soldiers in Russia currently is lower than the normal 260,000 soldiers. And currently, the Russian leadership is going to increase the age of conscription and to make this from 19 years old to 29 years old in 2024, from 20 years old to 29 years old in 2025, and from 29 years old or 21 years old to 29 years old in 2026, sorry. It is clear that this year from 18 to 26, next year from 19 to 29, and 2025, 2026, it is the same generation. It is the same age group, the same people. They will be conscripted during 4 years. It's a nonsense. And it seems that the Ministry of Defense is going to motivate people of this age group to start conscripted military service this year, this spring. Because if you are 18 years old and you're a student, probably student of college or university, and you know that you do have a draft deferment because of your education. And you will be graduated in 2021, 2022. And if you are not going to serve in army, you may avoid the conscription during the next 4 to 5 years. But if you know that you will be conscripted by 30 years old, by 29 years old, of course, because when you are 30, so you cannot be conscripted. It is much harder to avoid the conscription. And for these people who are currently 18 years old, 19 years old, it is better to serve right now. Yearly start, yearly finish. And it seems that this increasing of conscription age, it is like a psychological pressure of the Ministry of Defense on the age group, on the current age group that is going to be conscripted. And it seems that the Ministry of Defense does not care much about whom it will conscript in 2024, 2025, 2026. Currently, their main purpose is getting as more soldiers as possible this year, not 2024, 2025. And the next conscription is aimed to start in April the 1st, so in less than 2 weeks. And we still don't know how many people should be conscripted this spring. We still don't know what is the term of conscription. Then usually the term is April the 1st to July the 15th. But the last year we see that the fall conscription has been changed. Instead of October the 1st, December 31st, the conscription was conducted from November the 1st to December 31st. So we'll see what the spring conscription will be. But as I can presume, the Ministry of Defense put all its hopes on this spring conscription. And the third dimension of efforts is establishment of so-called volunteer formations within the Russian armed forces. The volunteer formations, volunteer units, is something strange, because there is no any regular chart for these units, for these formations. It may be 100 soldiers, it may be 400 soldiers. How many commanders? No one knows, but it is clear that the officers from the regular military units will be delivered to this volunteer units as commanders. And these volunteer units, in contrast with regular units, these volunteer units will not have, the unit of communications, the unit of artillery, the unit of armored vehicles, unit of main battle tanks, and so on, so on, so on. It will be just, a number of people with machine guns. And I wrote in my paper on Monday that the ministry's decree about this volunteer unit is still not enacted. When I wrote my paper last week, in a Russian legal basis, this decree was counted as not enacted. But today, a couple of hours ago, I checked this information again. This decree about the volunteer units is considered to be enacted in Russian legal basis. So that means that the Ministry of Defense is going to recruit volunteers into the military service in coming weeks, in coming month. These volunteers, they should sign a contract. So they may be counted as a contracted soldiers, but instead of normal contracted soldiers, the term of contract is not 2 years or 3 years. It looks like the term of contracts of volunteers will be much lower, maybe several months, maybe 6 months or 8 months, because the term of trainings, according to the ministry's decree, the term of training of these volunteers is just 10 days. Just 10 days. So let's imagine this potential volunteer comes to the recruit station, военный комиссариат, and signs the contract. Maybe he's motivated to sign this contract. Hey man, you can be volunteer or you will be mobilized. You may choose. He signs this contract. He gets 10 days training, and he is being sent to the battlefield. And according to the leaks among the different Russian regional authorities, The plan for such volunteers is up to 400,000 soldiers. I'm not sure that it is a real plan. Maybe it is just a bureaucratic bargaining. The Ministry of Defense or the Kremlin calls to the regional authorities and requires 400,000 soldiers, but in reality, it believes that the regions will give as much as possible, but less than 400,000 soldiers. It's bureaucratic bargaining. It's a typical practice within the Russian system.
Can I ask you, bargaining tool for what? Bargaining tool for the MOD with whom?
With regional authorities. With regional authorities, you ask more, but presuming that you will get less, because if you ask for 400,000 soldiers, so maybe you will have 200 or 300. But if you will ask 200 or 300, you will get 100 or 150,000. So
let me ask you, is this a part of the internal bargaining process? I mean, why does MOD want to go to the regions knowing that the regions won't give more recruits, that the recruiting levels already fell short? Is it basically they want to go back to Putin and say, oh, we tried to get more recruits, more conscripts, but it's the darn regions, they're the ones falling short? Is that the goal?
The Ministry of Defense currently does not have enough organizational sources to recruit as many soldiers as it needs. That's why the Ministry of Defense needs to rely on the governors, on mayors, and even on the regional businesses, because last several months, when the mobilization has been started, they got a significant number of mobilized soldiers with assistance of regional authorities, of regional factories, when the heads of the factories just sent some workers to the military service. They cooperated with the Ministry of Defense in aim to mobilize soldiers. And currently, it seems the Ministry of Defense wants regional authorities, regional businesses affiliated with authorities to help the Ministry of Defense to recruit more volunteers instead of more mobilized soldiers. But I'm not sure whether or not all these three dimensions of efforts will be realized somehow. But there is an elephant in the room, and this elephant is conscripted soldiers themselves. Yes, Putin declared that we will never send conscripted soldiers in the battlefield. But according to the Russian laws, the conscripted soldier may be sent in the battlefield after 4 months of military service. It is legally possible. And taking into account that in September 2022, Russia proclaimed Khersonskaya Oblast, Zaporizhia, Donetskaya Oblast, and Luganskaya Oblast as a Russian territory, these conscripted soldiers, in case of, some military crisis in the battlefield, in case of successful counteroffense of the Ukrainian armed forces, these conscripted soldiers can be sent in the battlefield in aim to defend the Russian territorial integrity. And there will not be any problem with this. There will be a political problem, of course. Currently, the most of soldiers, they get money, and it's a kind of, it's kind of bargain between between the soldiers and the authorities and the soldiers' families. Guys, we pay you, so let's die for us. Even the mobilized soldiers, they signed contracts, many of them. But if you send conscripted soldiers, the conscripted soldiers, they are not paid in Russia. So in this case, the Kremlin will need to, to make a new bargain, or just to use violence to send the conscripted soldiers to the battlefield. But it is possible. And maybe at the end, the Ministry of Defense will give up all these ideas about 521,000 contracted soldiers by the end of this year. Will give up all these ideas about 400,000 volunteers and so on, and so on, and so on, just because it still has a significant amount of conscripted soldiers. And this is the possibility of how the Kremlin can restore, partially restore its manpower on the battlefield.
Okay.
I'm stop here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Pavel Bayev, I want to go back to you. And you've heard everybody in their statements today. What do you think about all this? When you hear all these discussions about Wagner becoming a private army within Russia, and then the conscription problem, and what Pavel Luzin is talking about, manpower shortage. I mean, what do you, I mean, you're a longtime observer of the Russian army. I mean, what do you think of all this?
It is a very odd picture, and definitely it is a chain of improvisations in which the top brass is trying to resolve the manpower problem, which they never encountered before. And at the same time, improvisations are also happening outside of their control, because I think Prigozhin's idea about recruiting from the prison population was a great success. It's a big prison population, and he succeeded in persuading them to enlist into his troops. So every pool of potential manpower is now explored and examined, and they're trying to tap into various opportunities, given the demographic situation, which keeps worsening, and given also the fact that a lot of people try to escape. Probably twice as many people left Russia as were mobilized. In a sense, it's also a paradoxical situation, because the whole Russian strategic culture, the whole Russian military machine is oriented on warfare with large numbers. That's a tradition, that's the assumption which was never questioned. And even when the whole mobilization infrastructure was dismantled during Serdyukov's reforms, this idea that we can have as many soldiers as needed was very much there. And suddenly it's a shortage. And in some sense, it looks odd from a Russian strategic perspective how small the army is for this sort of effort, for this sort of tasks that it is given. It is much smaller than Soviet Union was able to field. You might remember that just the group of forces in Germany was 500,000. And it was really combat ready force. And the inability to field anything similar in numbers is still, for many Russian officers and generals, something odd they cannot quite internalize. What is happening with all the with all our recruitment and mobilization? Why the country isn't able to put in the trenches the sufficient number of soldiers? And that is it. It's a very different society. It's a very different country. It is not really Soviet Union reduced half of the Soviet Union, essentially, in terms of population. It is in many ways a different quality to this country, and an attempt to fall back on the Soviet patterns of waging war in trenches with artillery, with a lot of kind of people going forward is entirely unsustainable. So the fact that Ukrainians are learning, so to say, forward, learning modern war with modern equipment, with kind of with modern change of command, and Russians are learning backward, falling back to the old Soviet pattern is a striking fact. But I think Ukrainian pattern, in many ways, is very promising, and Russian falling back on the Soviet pattern is entirely hopeless, because just there is no capacity to sustain that old Soviet pattern. So I think that the Russian war machine is facing deeper and deeper troubles. Whatever tricks they're trying to play, whatever methods they're trying to bring up in order to fill the ranks. And another thing which is particularly striking, I think, in all this recruitment is how little of recruitment effort is centered in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's really probably the political risk factor. I cannot quite explain it, but for all evidence I see, including the casualties, Moscow and St. Petersburg are really spared. And they are generally huge urban centers. They are the main pools where you can hope to recruit qualified soldiers. And that is, again, the reality. Stop here.
Thank you. And we're going to open the floor to some questions and answers online. So feel free to pose your questions. I do want to go back to Sergei about Wagner and the prison recruitment campaign that they waged. Where do you see Wagner going forward in trying to replenish its manpower? Is it eliminated now? Is the prison option no longer possible for Prigozhin? What will he try to do to get Wagner back in a fighting capability?
Well, Glenn, that's a great question. According to some of the information that we are getting from Russia, basically Prigozhin has lost, again, reportedly has lost in access to Russia's penitentiary system. So this may be quite problematic for him to continue with this practice. Once again, although given the nature of battles and given the results of Wagner Group in the Donbass, especially in Solidar, I don't believe that the prisoners or convicts played the key role in this sort of victories in the region, in the Mecca region, because perhaps they were used as a bait, as some say. Some of them, at least the vanguard, but the main military operations were definitely conducted by experienced fighters, because there is no way on earth one can just assemble one can assemble convicts and turn them into a professional, basically, army that can achieve results in a confrontation with regular armed forces, Ukrainian regular armed forces. So I don't buy this. Going forward, I think that Wagner or Prigozhin rather may be interested in conscripting those Russians who have some or extensive military experience, those who had an experience of serving in the armed forces or in Russian militia or any formations like this. How this is going to work out, this is a huge question, because nowadays, as both Pavels actually said, Russia is in shortage of manpower, and given the attrition, given all the rumors and facts that we are getting from Ukraine, there will be not many Russians who will be willing to go and fight and die probably in Ukraine. So that would be a huge question. Prigozhin is quite vocal on this. He's saying that by May he's going to increase Wagner Group by 30,000 people, but it's very, very hard to imagine that 30,000 capable men to fight in Ukraine. So this is a huge question. Maybe he might try to find new recruits in the post-Soviet area, but once again, given the results of the Wagner Group and Russia's overall performance in Ukraine, as well as the upcoming Ukraine's counteroffensive, I'm not really sure that he'll be able to do that. Although, again, we can rule out this completely.
We have a question from Neil Wolf, who asks you if you or any of the other panelists can talk about the Institute for the Study of War's recent assessment that Wagner has reached its culminating point and its combat power is now on the decline. Sergey, go ahead and answer that, and then anybody else wants to join in.
Well, that's an interesting assertion, but unfortunately, again, we don't have even the exact number of Wagner fighters who are currently involved in hostilities in the Donbas region. So it's very hard to say. Definitely, I mean, given if we combine all the facts, all the videos from the battlefield, definitely, and even Prigozhin's own words, Wagner Group is suffering large, I can't say huge or just large losses in the Donbas, but definitely it is losing some of its most experienced personnel, some of its most experienced fighters. And everything, as Pavel, by the way, said, everything now depends on the performance and the tactics of the Ukrainian side. So if the counteroffensive is successful, then definitely it's a breaking point for Wagner Group. But given the trajectory of the combat around Bakhmut, we can see that the Russian offensive is slowing down. And basically, for the past couple of days, Russia hasn't had any major breakthroughs or major successes. So this may signify that the offensive potential of the Wagner Group is decreasing. But this is all speculations.
Yeah, certainly. Does anybody else want to comment?
Yes, I think as far as Russian high command is concerned, Russian top brass is concerned, for them it's perfectly fine. Yes, let Bakhmut be the end of Wagner's and Prigozhin. They are, and they'll be only happy with this option, with this perspective. Prigozhin has played this role. He may go. They see no need in his presence anymore. Well, it's not, again, up to Gerasimov and even up to Shoigu to decide. I think it's one of the Putin's old habits. Try always to have something, some sort of alternative, some sort of counterbalance. He doesn't want to be entirely dependent upon his generals, not being a military man himself, not really having any strategic understanding of the course of the war. I think he finds Prigozhin useful, but Prigozhin is so good at playing his own game that he is really a tricky instrument for Putin to apply. And I think what strength of Prigozhin has is in combination of kind of the operations on the battlefield and operation in the information space. He has very direct access to various media and is able to play them much more skillfully than the top brass is able to do that. And in the recruitment, he is also very able to make that policy, so to say, personal, appealing to the potential recruits in the sense, yes, there is this Wagner Group and we care about you. You are important for us. If you're killed, we will make sure you're properly buried. If you're wounded, you will receive compensation. It's not just some huge bureaucratic military machine that recruits you. You are a part of very particular force. And for some people, it works. This personal touch, so to say, this very special appeal. But I think at the end of the day, in the big picture of the war, this is just an episode, and I think the military high command will succeed in getting rid of that kind of deviation in their perspective, of that oddity in the whole military structure. I think they will succeed in restoring completely the chain of command and the integrity of the structure.
There's a question from Robert Brinkley, says, has Prigozhin changed from being Putin's tool into a political threat to Putin? If so, how is Putin likely to respond? And I think, Pavel Bayev, you tried to answer that a little bit, that he finds to using alternatives. I think you kind of addressed that. What do you think, Sergey?
Well, the main question, that's once again, that's a great question. But the real question is whether Putin is fully in charge, fully in control of what is happening in Russia now. That's the main question. So if you go a little bit away from what is happening just in Bakhmut or in Ukraine in general, what we can see are very interesting ideas coming from different, I would say, different forces within Russia. For instance, Deripaska, just 2 days ago, he already started talking about what he would do, how he would change this, how he would change that. So also we see the rise of Prigozhin. Also, I wouldn't exclude him, by the way, completely. He's a very, very shrewd man. He is not just, he's not directly related to military. When I started writing about Russian PMCs, actually, according to some reports, he was initially against him being put in charge of Wagner Group because he didn't see much of a value in this. But he was also, and he is an entrepreneur. I mean, not Western style entrepreneur, but rather the Russian style entrepreneur. Allegedly, he served 2 terms back in the Soviet prison. So he knows Russia inside out. He knows how things work in Russia very well. He knows what Pavel said about background or backgrounds of all major figures in the Russian political Olympus, in the Russian vertical of power. So I think that the fact that he is demonstrating his political ambitions, I think he knows what he's doing. I mean, I may be wrong, but I think he does have a pretty good idea of what is happening in the Kremlin, what is happening in Russia in general. So this may be one of the manifestation of his further actions. Also, once again, we have Deripaska, we have other influential figures who are also probably thinking about maybe overtaking or rather playing a greater role in Russia's future, Russia in the future. So the real question to me is whether it is Putin who sees something or who doesn't see something. Now Putin is behaving like he is just, I wouldn't say a puppet or a Muppet show, but he doesn't look like a leader who has everything under his control, honestly.
Pavel Bayev, Henrik Seip has a question of you about, he wants to know your view about Prigozhin. So does he really have anything like a political power base of his own? Have his attempts to stir up trouble in St. Petersburg been mostly futile?
No, I don't really see his power base. Unlike Kadyrov, who has retreated to his Chechnya and sitting there quietly waiting for his time, I don't think Prigozhin is anywhere anything similar. And it's not even clear where his money comes from. If originally links were more or less through the military budget and through military intelligence, where now his funding is coming is definitely not from his pocket. They are not that deep. So there are a lot of mystery about Prigozhin, but as far as power bases, political power base is concerned, I think it is nearly non-existent. And I think he's playing it in a very short horizon with a very high risk. And I don't think that in that game he has any chance to win big. It's essentially a survival game. He's playing, and yes, he is surviving and keeps surviving. But at one point or another, the game is doomed to end bad for him.
Sergey, we have a question I think you can answer from Philip Birshka, who's asking a question about the announcements by Kadyrov and Gazprom Neft about creating their own private armies. Can we expect to see development further of oligarchization of private armies in Russia? What does it mean for the Kremlin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this question. In fact, we can go further, and what we can see in Kursk and Bryansk regions, actually, the local governors are already forming they don't call it private armies or private military companies, but rather they're creating groups that may be paramilitary or militarized groups. They also call them volunteers, who may hold personal allegiance to them. So for Kremlin and for Moscow, this may be a very, very I would say this may constitute a large challenge in the future, especially if the war doesn't go according to Russia's plan, if there is any plan, of course, although Russia keeps repeating that everything goes according to plan. If things go really badly in this war with Ukraine, and if the economic stagnation, if it increases, then definitely we can see some sort of internal destabilization in Russia, and those forces could be used for a struggle for power in a way close to what we had observed in the 1990s, although today the level of gravitation will be much higher because many of those people, they did have military experience fighting in Ukraine, fighting in other parts of the former Soviet Union. So maybe this may be even more problematic for Moscow. And also, I think Gazprom Neft is not creating just a private army. It's more like a private security company. It's less of a private military company, and we don't know exactly I wrote an article. I actually wrote 2 pieces on this. We don't know neither the composition of this reported private security company, nor the number of members in this private security company. Also, Kadyrov, I also know that he stated about that, but not really sure whether this is just a statement, because Kadyrov actually does have personnel that is loyal to him personally. So whether he needs a PMC or not, maybe it's just I don't know, just manifestation of his ambitions, or so. It's very, very, very hard to say. But for Kremlin, this is definitely a challenge. This will be a challenge because it could remind me then of the time of troubles in Russia back in the days. So creation of these paramilitary groups, this could be one of the factors in the upcoming struggle within Russia, struggle for power and internal destabilization that, according to Janusz Bogaysky, could lead to internal rupture in Russia. I hope this answers the question. Sorry, it's very, very speculative.
I think it did. Pavel Luzin, did you want to comment? I didn't want to ignore you here.
As I can say, according to my research, all the military activity, I mean, armored security activity, technically speaking, armored security activity in Russia is controlled by Rosguardia, by FSB, and so on. And Sergei is completely right. Currently, when the institutional system of Russia works, all this activity is not a problem. But when the institutions will defunct, or if the institutions will defunct one day, if the Russian political system will go into chaos, this activity will be a great problem, will be a great challenge for Russia and for Russian society, especially on the regional level, because Moscow can keep order. I mean, the Kremlin, the areas around Kremlin, the capital, even St. Petersburg may be safe, but towards the other regions, especially in Ural, in Siberia, in the Russian south, in Caucasus, in the Far East, that will be a problem. That will be a problem. And one more point towards Wagner and Prigozhin. I try not to overestimate the independence or the level of autonomy of Prigozhin. Of course, every puppet always tries to increase its level of autonomy. But Prigozhin is a manager of these mercenaries. I mean, financial manager, because he is not military planner. Who plans the operations of Wagner? I don't know. Who gives money to Prigozhin? Because there is no any business in the world, I mean, in Russia or all the diamonds and gold of Central African Republic does not give the level of profit, of net profit, that makes the thousands of mercenaries possible. I presume, it's only a presumption, it's not even the hypothesis, it's just a presumption, speculation, brainstorming. I presume that Prigozhin is financed through the article of the Russian federal budget that is called National Security and Law Enforcement, because this article increased last year significantly, and this article increased significantly this year, together with the national defense budget. And I presume that tens of billions of rubles goes from this article, from the National Security and Law Enforcement to Prigozhin, to his mercenaries. Through which institution, I don't know. Maybe FSO, maybe main Directorate for Special Presidential Programs, GUSP. It's small enough, but really secret security service in Russia. I presume it is not FSB. Maybe I am wrong. I presume it is not military intelligence. Maybe I am wrong. But either FSO or GUSP, they are responsible for Prigozhin, in my opinion.
We have a question for you, Pavel Luzin, from Travis Clark, who's asking a question about, has the Russian Defense Ministry explained the disparity between the aggregate data on conscription and the regional data? And try to answer that question. Then we're going to go back to, I'm going to ask you about, and everybody else, a question about shortages of manpower in Russian defense industry. We've talked about conscription, army levels. How is it going to affect the defense industry? So go ahead and answer Mr. Clark's question, Pavel, and then we'll do a lightning round to ask everybody and conclude it.
So towards these contradictions and disparity, no, the Ministry of Defense did not clarify this. Towards the spring conscription 2022, it was an official statement of Sergei Shoigu. It was 11 of July 2022, 4 days before the official end of conscription, that he said, so we sent 89,000 soldiers to the troops, conscripted soldiers. 4 days before the end of conscription, so there is no any other, transportation of conscripted soldiers to the armed forces. So they planned to draft 134,000 soldiers. They sent to the troops 89,000 soldiers. So there was an official information. Towards the fall conscription, no, the Ministry of Defense said nothing about the results of conscription. And towards regions, there was interesting situation when, for instance, in December, 3 weeks before the end of conscription, the Orenburg military commissar of Orenburgskaya Oblast, he said, we conscripted 80% of the plan. So 80% before 3 weeks before the end, it's okay. But at the same time, the military commissar of Perm region, Permsky Krai, he said, we conscripted 15% of the soldiers. And 3 weeks before the end, it's not enough. You cannot conscript 85% of the plan just in 3 weeks. What's the difference? The most of the conscripted soldiers from Orenburg, they serve in the strategic missile forces. That's a tradition. The most of the conscripted soldiers from Perm, they serve in the ground forces, in the ground forces, and some of them in airborne troops. So if guys in different regions, they know very well their prospect of military service, they try to calculate what's the risk. If you know that you will send to strategic missile forces, so you don't have any risk. You will not be sent in Ukraine. But if you are from Perm, you know that 90% probability you will be sent in ground troops, and who can guarantee you that you will not be sent in Ukraine? So that's why there are such imbalances within the fall conscription of 2022. And how the Ministry of Defense is going to manage this, I don't know. They put its bet on propaganda. They argue recruits that, guys, you will never be sent in Ukraine. You are conscripted soldiers. We promise you. We will send you in Vladivostok, in Khabarovsk, in Siberia, not in Ukraine. We promise you again. Don't worry. That's the propaganda efforts. I know the fact that the musicians of military orchestra in Dagestan, conscripted soldiers, musicians, they last year they have been sent for 2 weeks in the area closer to to the front line, just to dig some some fortifications. And they didn't participate in combat activities. They just, they were diggers, builders. But for 2 weeks, they were sent. These military musicians were sent in Donbass. After that, they were back and they continue their, musical activity in the armed forces. So everything is possible. And Ministry of Defense did not clarify.
Can we get to the question about the manpower in the defense industry? Because we're running short on time. I want to try to wrap this up and let other people speak.
Yuri Borisov, that time vice prime minister of Russia responsible for defense industry, said in June 2022 that there is a deficit, there is a lack of 400,000 engineers and workers in the Russian military industrial complex. What did he mean? I mean, whether or not this lack, they need more, 400,000 more workers and engineers, or they have this lack for several years. I don't know. He did not clarify this. But currently, it was a week ago, last week, the Russian government started the program with the amount of 700 million rubles. Not so much, it's about $10 million, for training of 12,000 workers for military industrial complex. The term of the program is not clear, but I presume they're going to train new workers during this year. From which industries, from which areas they will take these workers, they are going to take these workers. I don't know. Maybe they want to recruit some, people from less paid areas to promise them huge salaries in military industry. But 12,000 workers, it's almost nothing, because last year when the Russian government announced its plans for increasing civil aircraft manufacturing in Russia because of ban for Boeings and Airbus aircrafts, the aircraft industry, just 3 factories. I mean, Ulyanovsk, Voronezh, and Kazan. They said, for increasing manufacturing of civil aircraft, we need 8,000 more workers and engineers just to increase manufacturing of 214 aircrafts and to start the manufacturing of MS-21, but MS-21 is in Irkutsk. Yes, 8,000 workers just for civil aircraft manufacturing. So 12,000 workers for the whole military industrial complex is just nothing, in my opinion.
Yeah, other panelists, Pavel and Sergey, do you want to comment?
If I can have a word, I think what might help in finding more workers, engineers for the defense industrial complex is a lot of hidden unemployment in industries which are hit by sanctions, particularly automobile industry. In principle, there is a workforce available for them, but the mobility of this workforce is very low. And military industrial plants are typically in very special locations. Bringing their new labor forces is quite difficult. What might again stimulate people to go there is that if you're working in the defense industrial plants, you are safe from mobilization. And it's another tool they might try. But again, you're increasing your labor force there. It means your mobilization pool suffers. So it's very much a game where who suffers most is unclear. But overall, my opinion is that the Russian military machine is suffering a lot of pains, is going through a lot of degradation, in fact. Instead of trying to go into more modern, more efficient weapon system with information technologies, it's very much falling back to the something much more primitive, probably more workable and more reliable, more crude, less requiring less qualification, both in production and in use. But that is not a way to win the war. That is an attempt really to trying to postpone the inevitable defeat.
Thank you. Sergey?
Just one comment. I basically agree with everything what Pavel said, both of them, what they said. Just one remark. Even before the war, before the outbreak of war, Russian industry was already facing shortages and problems with manpower and qualified experts and professionals. Now with, well, by conservative, assessments, hundreds of thousands people immigrating or trying to escape Russia. I think all those problems that we observed in the past, they're likely to multiply. And I don't see how Russia is capable of dealing with these issues, honestly.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap things up. We've gone on a little bit longer than we anticipated, and so certainly we'll have to save room to do this again in another future point. I very much appreciate everyone that our panelists today, the speakers. You just always enlighten me, and you're some of the best experts around on Russian military and security. So very much thank you for participating, everyone. And we'll be posting this video online on our YouTube page after it's over. Hopefully a lot of people will be able to watch it who couldn't join in today. And stay tuned with Jamestown. Keep reading your Asia Daily Monitor, and we hope to see you again. So thank you, everyone, for participating.